What's up? Welcome back to another episode of Off the Top. With Halloween looming around, we thought we'd get into some more interesting abstract ideas that we always talk about, and that is theories, whether it be conspiracy or the unknown or potentially science related. I thought we're going to talk on some pretty interesting things that either you heard of, you haven't heard of. We're trying to pick some of the more obscure things that aren't so mainstream. So maybe you pick something up out of this. As always, if you haven't already, like, follow us, share it. We really appreciate the feedback. And with that being said, we'll get into our first one.
Okay, so I have a feeling that you're pretty excited about this, but which gets me excited about it. I'm definitely more of an empirical guy, so I really nailed and did some research on these scientific theories. So the first one that I feel like would be really interesting to get into, and maybe I have a hard time wrapping my head around it, is it's called the bullet time theory. And so this bullet time theory, what it states is that as scientists say, the universe is expanding. And so the things that we can see are basically going further away from us. And this theory, on the contrary, says that the universe isn't expanding. It's just time slowing down. So if you kind of get your head wrapped around it, let me give you like an anecdotal thing. So instead of things traveling further away, the things that we can see are slowing down.
So are we reaching so where does bullet time come in? Are we speeding up so things are slowing down, or just time itself is slowing down?
So if you think about it, I mean, it's not like we can see the whole universe. Mm-hmm. Anyway, regardless if it was expanding past our view or if it wasn't, or if it was contracting. We'd start seeing new things every light year. Like a thing that was a light year away from our vision, next year we'll be able to see. But in this theory, it's saying that nothing's really expanding. It's just that the time frame, the time-space continuum of what we can see is slowing down. For instance, saying like, okay, so let's say that you were sitting in a chair, and let's say you turn on the light, and the light is slowly like going over everything in this room. And so at first you can only see something 5 feet away from you, and then you see something that's 6 feet away from you, and it's a toy car, and this toy car is traveling away from you. Mm-hmm. And so eventually, depending on how far you can see and how fast the toy car travels, you'll eventually not be able to see it. Instead of that being the case, this bullet time theory is stating that toy car really isn't going anywhere. It's just that, like, that light, it's getting slower and slower traveling. So
what I'm thinking is we have observed so much that we've hit a limit, not necessarily a limit, but we've observed so much that light itself is where we're looking at. It's taking time to get there. So like your example, the light turning on, like you see your room and it's slowly going over everything, and that toy car is way out there. So we observed that, and now we're at a point where we're seeing necessarily like kind of where it takes light to get to a little bit longer.
Well, I mean, that's always been the case, and that's how we've like noticed different things in the universe as far as new galaxies or all that sort of things. What you can see is the distance at what you can see at. And so, yes, now it's taking time for light traveling either way to go through a whole bunch of like road, like a really long, windy road to get to our telescope, so to speak.
Okay. I like that one. That one is very broad, but like I feel if I kind of settle in and think about that one, it's kind of interesting because it's saying necessarily that the world isn't expanding, but it's shrinking, staying the same.
No, so the universe isn't. It's kind of giving a counterpoint to the universe is expanding at an exceeding rate. Mm-hmm. It's saying that time is slowing down, at an exceeding rate because of dark matter. So basically, the more I'm kind of into physics and space, and so there's a principle saying that when something has more mass to it and more of a gravitational pull, that also is a gravitational pull for time. So that means that time slows down in certain places. So for instance, a quick one would be in a black hole, there's something called an epicenter. And a black hole basically, some people can go back and forth on how it's created, but pretty much what a black hole is an extraordinary like gravitational pull. So much so that there's this thing called the epicenter or event horizon on a black hole, which means that if we were watching a black hole and we threw something in the black hole, we'd see it go into the black hole really, really fast. And then the second it gets close to the black hole, it'll slow down to the point that we just see it sitting there at this event horizon point. And that event horizon point, with that gravitational pull, it sucks up time, it sucks up light. So what that means is nothing is escaping it. But at the same time, time is so slow that light is taking a long time to come to us and then eventually disappear.
Yeah. All right. I like it. I like where we're starting. So I'm going to stick in the universe or, expansion, not necessarily the observable universe, but the many worlds theory, something that you and I have talked about all the time. Many worlds theory basically states you wake up in the morning and you have a cup of coffee. So in another world, you wake up and you don't have a cup of coffee. And this can kind of translate to stories you heard of people supposed to be getting on planes and they're late and that plane ends up crashing and they don't get on it. So basically, this theory is for every decision you have, there's a split off in an alternate universe or multiverse that something else happens or you didn't do it, which leads to completely different results, which I think is just truly interesting because I think about it all the time. Like, if I didn't go to this movie and I went to study for 2 hours, would I have gotten a better grade on the test? I don't know. But in the same scenario, say I did go study and then I actually got distracted and went and had pizza. You never know what could happen. And I think it's just one of those things that's fun to think about all the decisions you make in a day, from waking up and putting on a certain pair of shoes or replying to someone a certain way. There's always an opposite that could happen.
So let me challenge you in this thought process. What's the opposite of walking at 5 miles per hour?
So say you're going a jog at 10 miles an hour, at 8 miles an hour.
Wouldn't you say that that's just a degree of traveling at 5 miles per hour? So for instance, like let's say that I am walking at 5 miles per hour. A degree of walking at 5 miles per hour is me going in that same direction at 2 times my speed, which is 10 miles per hour. So is that really the opposite?
But what if, so there's you walking and you going on a jog at 10 miles an hour, it's cold outside and you tear something.
I mean, but then you're getting to the point of like, what I'm just asking is like, so what is the direct opposite of some of these things? Like, is it all action? So for instance, like I said, those things that can't really have an opposite. Like, I mean, you painted a good picture about either going getting coffee or studying or going to the movies and studying. Like there's some like dichotomy and polarity between those things. But I'm just curious, like if anyone asked the creators of this theory, what about the things that aren't really opposite of each other? Like, I mean, being awake and going to sleep, those are opposite. We can understand that, but like, varies of time or things.
I believe it's all on how it influences yourself. So whether it be walking or jogging, it's the influence it has on yourself. So maybe you plan on going on a walk, right? And you're walking at 5 miles an hour and you get back and you're not as tired. And then you go and jog at 10 miles an hour. You still get back probably the same route, but you're a little bit more tired. And it takes you 10 extra minutes to get to watching the movie you wanted to watch, or 10 extra minutes to study, or whatever it may be. So it's still an influence on you, and a different route's going to happen, where unless saying everything stays the same, which is a small chance, but it's likely it could happen. But it's always going to influence something a little bit different.
Gotcha. And doing research into this too, I mean, when they say like you said, many worlds, I've also heard multi-universe. And so, I mean, I think that would make sense in the fact that, but with those varying degrees, you split like an incremental amount. And they say that there's like in this theory, they say that there's an infinite amount of universes because you got to think about it. Even though you're saying you split off and make another universe, you got to think about you split off and make many. So for instance, you don't just only get coffee, you add milk in it. And in a universe, somebody doesn't get or gets coffee, but doesn't add milk. So, I mean, for your actions, there's millions of ways to, dissect it. And that's kind of what I try to paint the picture of like, well, I mean, something can be not opposite of something and still have that effect.
Yeah. And it's just, I think one of those things that it's fun to think about. I don't know if you'll ever be able to prove it, but I slightly believe in it. And I think it's just fun to think about all the decisions you make in your life, from interviewing for this job, going on this trip, buying this item. And it's just fun to think about everything that you've done in your life that could have altered something. And it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah. And like, I think the same way. And even on a broader scale, like as in like big momentous things, like for instance, like let's say that Germany won World War II, or even Germany won World War One. I mean, there's different things that like, are extraordinarily momentous and really change the scope of how we see, our regular life today.
Yeah. Yeah. So like he touched on earlier in the kind of multiverse theory, there's really an infinite amount of things that could have happened from, before you were born to when you were born to 20 years after, 40 years after. The amount of choices you make in your lifetime is monumental, and it's just fun to elaborate on.
So, I mean, with that, I think that I feel like I'm more centered around this one and I can digest it easier. It's called the heat death theory of the universe. So basically what it's saying is that with every action, eventually, like, because there's only an infinitesimal amount of or finite amount of just things in the universe. And so eventually all the energy in the universe, because energy flows in a way of like, it's in a point of high energy and it wants to get to a point of low energy. Just like if you were to boil a pot of water, it's boiling and seething, but if you just leave it alone, that energy will dissipate and that water won't be boiling anymore. And so eventually what that is like, they call it the heat death of the universe. Eventually all the energy in the universe will be at an equal or level amount. And that would be the death of the universe.
Okay. And is that talking specifically, because heat death, like heat means either super hot or super cold, right?
Heat as in, so I think it's a way to paint the picture. Like, for instance, so much energy is lost through friction and heat. So even like you sitting here, you moving your arms, there's creating friction and there is heat. So you're losing energy through heat.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's one of those theories that falls under, I'm curious to see where that happens, because it's gonna happen. I would say so. From what you said, I would believe that eventually there's gonna be a peak to whatever heat is out there. All levels are gonna rise to that level and destroy the universe.
Well, I wouldn't say it's destroy the universe. It would just kind of like smother anything. So, for instance, like if there was a uniform amount of heat to everything, you wouldn't exist and I wouldn't exist, because what we are like a bundle of particles and atoms and things, and that can be effectively created into heat or energy. And so it's not that heat, it's just that heat will be the product of all the energy being at a uniform height of, like, I don't know what the scale would be, but yeah, so.
I think that other thing I think about when you say that is people talk about our observable universes and potentially more. But for this theory too, it regardless of if you think there's one universe or more than we can see, all that heat is gonna go to that level, which we don't know what that temperature is or what that is, but eventually all those universes would hit that same spot, right? I mean, it could be billions of trillions of quadrillions of 10 years, but it's kind of going back to is like when you're talking about black holes, there's I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there's a theory that there's one black hole out there that is the reigning champion. That's 10-0 that is going around, and black holes eat black holes. So there's one that eats one, gets a little bit bigger. There's another one, that same one eats another one, and then that guy's 2-0, 3-0, and then he could be taken out by one that's won for the past trillion years or whatever it may be, which is another scary thing to think about.
Yeah, and that actually, that's funny. We didn't talk about this transition, but if I can, that's a perfect transition to a theory that I was researching as well, that we could be living in a black hole. And the reason why is that we're not sure what happens once something is digested into a black hole. I mean, there's things that we can observe through a black hole, like for instance, like there's something that basically is the equivalent to a black hole burping, and it's when it just takes all of these planets, galaxies, and all of this stuff in, and it almost like has like a regurgitation moment, and what it does is shoots out this insane amount of energy, and this energy is called a quasar. And so what these quasars do is they'll just go for like thousands of light years and millions of light years and just destroy whatever's in its path. But I mean, that's something that we can observe from a black hole, but we don't know what happens when something fully gets into a black hole, or if like gravity like restabilizes and things of that nature. But that was just the most perfect transition I've ever saw.
Yeah, just equally terrifying that we could be in a black hole and have no clue, or we could be looking at black holes and figure out, the monstrosity of what they do, the damage. Like, I like to picture black holes as, the sixth grade bully walking around, and, he's wrecking his shop, and the little middle school or the little fourth graders. And then comes in Chuck Norris, right? Chuck Norris handles this dude. And then something bigger and badder handles Chuck Norris, and that guy reigns the world for as long as it goes on. Or simply like, we're sucked into this black hole and we have no clue. Like, there's all these things, and maybe there's a moment where we're like, I'm in a black hole, but we'll never be able to tell until, someone somehow does something, but I have no clue what that would be.
And I think that's like the part of the inevitability of these theories and things like makes me feel comfortable, because I mean, when I don't have control of a situation, then I can totally say, well, I'm just an audience member of what's going on. And so it kind of like, I don't know if it's just something that's very odd or peculiar, but it makes me relax that, okay, I have no control over me being in a black hole or not. So
yeah, it's kind of an odd way to think, but it makes sense. Like, not a lot of people are. I mean, you're probably not thinking about it every day, but like when you come back to it, it's kind of a obscure thing to think about. Comfort in a black hole.
Well, not even that. Just like whenever I'm like stressed out, I'll like research something about space or something, and once I get like basically the thought process of you're really, really, really small and you're existing for a very, very short amount of time relatively, then I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's not that big of a deal, whatever happened. Like, I'm not going to exist in a blink of an eye relative to what's been going on.
Yeah. And I think that whole space is a whole concept that blows my mind. And talking about blowing people's minds, this one is called MK Ultra. You guys have probably heard about it. It's in Stranger Things. I kind of did some more research, and it's founded on the Smithsonian. And basically, MK Ultra ran from the 1950s to 1973, and it was a CIA mind control experiment. So they were using human test subjects and various chemical and biological materials to see how it changed people's behavior and potentially control minds and what it did to the human psyche. And I think it's one of those things that 1950s to 1973, that's a 23-year gap that it was under wraps until someone noticed probably in the early 70s, late 60s, that it's just so bizarre to me that people were just being tested on to, see if they could have their mind controlled or what that may be.
Yeah. And so first off, when you said MK Ultra, I was like, okay. And I did some research about that, but not recently. That was like, I had like this conspiracy kick where I was just kind of like looking at every which way. But I think that arbitrates the premise of it being a theory, because it has been proved and it was real and there's documentation about it. But yeah, it's super odd, and it's almost unreal, or you naturally hear that and you say, like, if somebody says, yeah, the government was experimenting on human beings on how to control minds, you'd say that's something that is spurious or plausible but false. But I mean, it's one of those things that paints a picture of, no, that actually happened. That's pretty. Yeah,
one of those kind of conspiracy theories that you talk about or joke about, then you find out it's true, is shocking. And I'm pretty sure the test just led to severe nausea and vomiting and even a few deaths to what they were doing. I don't know how long some of the patients were in this project where it was held, but at some point, someone in the government of some power took human test subjects and was, I want to mind control people, or I want to see what these effects were. We don't know if it was specifically for mind control, but considering that's what a lot of the research I did spoke on, was very intriguing for the 1950s to 1973 time period.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, casualties in that would probably make sense, because from my understanding, they were heavily induced with drugs and PCP and LSD and mind-altering chemicals to kind of mold their plastic minds into something that can be controlled.
Yeah. And there's no instances where they say it was a success, but you don't know. The people that said it didn't work aren't all the people that were there, or the people that may have passed away in the certain test time zone of 23 years. It could have worked for a short amount of time. We won't know. I doubt they would release something like that, but something kind of get the brain thinking about and think about. I mean, it's 2017. There's probably stuff that's going on that we aren't aware of, like the people in the 50s and 60s weren't aware that this was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And like talking about how we discover things from the past that we didn't know at the time that they were happening. This is some current event things and isn't a theory, but it's very interesting and is relative to this. Donald Trump tweeted, that's our U.S. president, tweeted that he will be releasing some of the JFK assassination investigation documents. So, wow, I'll say that 5 times fast. JFK assassination investigation documents. But so that will be very, very interesting. And I mean, there's going to be thousands of pages of things that somewhat aren't as salacious or like very, very like, oh my gosh, this is crazy in there. But there'll also be, I'm sure, some very, very interesting things, and we'll paint the picture if it was just a one-man job or if there was more people involved.
Yeah. And I think, we haven't touched on assassinations. I don't have anything on assassinations to really touch on, but it always is crazy to think about the amount of assassinations that occurred in a certain time frame to where, my life, I haven't seen any U.S. assassinations of kind of that scale. There's always obviously been terroristic threats or bombings, which are truly saddening, but there hasn't been any political assassinations that I'm aware of, or righteous leader assassinations, which will make that document very intriguing to see what comes out of it or what people are saying at that time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're right in the fact that there hasn't been anything, at least that comes to mind currently right now, which I'm wrong all day long usually, but not that I can think of and comes to mind about anybody's, particularly in the U.S., being assassinated. Now, I mean, in other places in the world, that's more of a common occurrence. But yeah, in the U.S., I can't think of one. But that even makes it more interesting to say, like, so this is what it was like to have, like, your leader and command in chief, and kind of put yourself in the citizen's shoes at that time.
Yeah, I agree. So kind of skipping to a more bright and happy subject, I thought this would be fun to split in there. And this one is the Pixar theory. Became kind of popular 3 years ago. And a guy named John Negroni figured out and laid out this long video and timeline that every movie from Pixar is in the same universe at a different time period. And that is why you see various Easter eggs in different Pixar movies, such as the Toy Story rocket pizza truck, or maybe Mike Wazowski from Monsters, Inc., or Cars, or WALL-E, or Brave, or Up, or whatever it may be. As different as they are, it is all along the same timeline, with the first one being Brave, which is obviously the oldest one, and you'll see drawings in there of characters from Monsters, Inc. and various other Pixar movies. And then that goes on to Up is somewhere in the middle, where if you've seen the movie, he puts on a talking or speaking collar onto the dog so that the animals can talk. And then it progresses to, Monsters, Inc. being the last one. It's a really interesting theory, and it's kind of fun if you're a Pixar fan to understand that these Easter eggs have kind of linked up and it makes sense. I would check out the video. It's a lot. It's like 20 minutes long, but it really, from my childhood perspective, was really cool to see how all of these link together, and it's super detailed on how that worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those theories are like always cool, especially when you have a childhood connection to them. And I mean, absolutely plausible to have a universe that Pixar has fostered to incorporate everything in them. So yeah, I mean, as far as theories go, that's the one that I could hop on board the quickest.
Yeah, I think the one that kind of got me too is I would have figured WALL-E was the last one, but I think WALL-E is somewhere before Monsters, Inc. So there's this world of trash and whatnot, and then I can't remember exactly in the video, but then that translates to Monsters, Inc., where the world is being cleaned up and these monsters are kind of quote unquote running things and going into these doorways, which are alternate universes or a multiverse, right? You open the door and you're going into a child's room, wherever it may be, or a different time period if you see from some of them. And that's kind of wraps in what we talked about earlier, but very interesting to think on what Toy Story could mean to things, or, Cars, or what that may be.
Yeah, exactly. Or like trying to relate. So Cars was going on when this story was going on. Yeah. And it's like, you can get really in there.
Yeah. I guess I can go with another one that's I thought it was kind of funny and obscure. I'm not a believer in it, but that Shakespeare was someone else. What do you think about that?
Can you elaborate? Because, I mean, I could be someone else.
So there is little biological proof that Shakespeare was around. Not a lot of outside documentation that he ever showed up or premiered in certain or was at his certain playwrights or was in certain societies of culture back then. And a lot of people around that time were kind of in that playwright theory, such as like Francis Bacon or Earl of Oxford. So they believe that Shakespeare was, I think, one of those kind of how authors do like pseudonym names or different names, where they didn't want to be known as that person and were writing under that name.
I mean, that's definitely a possibility, and it's happened before. He's escaping my name right now, but I was talking to somebody about how somebody who I don't want to like speak out of like context and like confuse people, but there was somebody who was a famous author who had a ghost name or a pseudonym that he used to write books. So that's a totally understandable. But I mean, as far as first blush, somebody as venerable as Shakespeare and well respected, and is a household name pretty much. It's hard for me to say, yeah, that person that I thought existed doesn't exist. And granted, like, there's no photographs of him, but I mean, there was no photographs of anyone back then, or, you know,
Sweet Life paintings back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. I've seen a few Shakespeare plays, and obviously had to read it in high school, but just one of those things that kind of gets your mind thinking if you do the research or whatnot, that there's little biological proof or that he wasn't in some other society or doing something at that time. But I mean, if you're addicted to the craft and he's just living in the basement of his mid-century colony home, you know, maybe that's what he was doing.
Yeah, true that. So to backtrack a little bit more on somewhat of the Pixar universe. So, I mean, I feel like this is going to just like, you know, give me utmost street cred with all my Star Wars geeks. I'm actually wearing Star Wars pants right now, believe it or not. Yeah, this can be confirmed. But so there's a theory that in the Star Wars universe and those series, that Jar Jar Binks was the ultimate Sith Lord. And you're laughing because I think you probably have heard of this, or maybe I've even mentioned it on some weird sugar high rant of mine. But so, I mean, pretty much what it's saying is that if you can go back and rewatch him, when Jar Jar Binks goes back to his hometown with Qui-Gon Jinn, he's extraordinarily feared, almost like he's like not just a village idiot, but is something more insidious, possibly. And so, first off, that sets off a bell. And even before they go into the water place, Jar Jar Binks is running, and you know, I mean, he's just synonymous with being clumsy. This guy jumps into the water from 20 feet high and does like a triple pirouette backspin, if that's even a movement, and then lands in the water. So, I mean, and there's also just like certain things that, if you really break down the scenes that he's in, that shows that he could have some sort of ties to the Sith or the dark side of the Force. And I mean, when the Emperor was crowned to be basically like brought into power, Jar Jar Binks was there by his side. And I mean, there's just like instances of that happening that kind of alludes to this guy being not just the clumsy idiot that he was at first blush.
Yeah, I think we've spoke on it a few times, and more so about how the audience of Star Wars and the fans have such a love-hate relationship with Jar Jar Binks, where there's complete Reddit threads from people hating him to loving him to this one you're talking about. And I like to imagine that Jar Jar Binks is the baddest guy in the universe, and he's just hiding it, and that they would make a standalone Jar Jar Binks movie where he's just wrecking shop, but
absolutely never.
That's only a wish.
Yeah, no. I hope they wouldn't, because that would be slanderous. Absolutely horrible. But yeah, and I mean, I feel like that kind of that character that Jar Jar Binks plays has been played in multiple areas, and even like back in books, like, you know, you have your silly almost sidekick or role player, and even in Don Quixote, some would say Don Quixote, being as whimsical as he was that, and Sancho Panza was more of the logical, grounded one. But I mean, there's so many times that we've seen his character played in different like contexts.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy also to think that the growth of Star Wars over time, but people are still just, anytime you bring up Jar Jar Binks, you're gonna get a reaction if they've seen the series, right?
Yeah, I mean, if they follow and can understand. I mean, there's some people that just kind of watch it, and so I feel like I have a real passion for Star Wars, and I can get going if I wanted to, talking about the new installments and whatnot. So I'm going to keep that for another day. But yeah, I would definitely say so. If you watch Star Wars, you have something to say about Jar Jar Binks, regardless of, yeah, he's forgettable, and it doesn't matter if he was in it or not, or he's actually a Sith Lord, or he is an absolute like bungler of everything.
Yeah. Kind of talking on those character sides, or a little bit more of the abstract or common. I'll bring this one in. When I say Sasquatch, what do you think of?
I think of shitty camera photos. That's what I think.
Very true. See, I like to, I don't know, I used to be a believer, but I just like to watch the TV shows of sassy, people trying to capture sassy. But on the same note, like, my theory, bringing in personal theories here, is that Sasquatch was around at one point, and it wasn't a giant hairy creature. I believe at one point when people were shunned from societies for certain disabilities and put out in the woods, that this guy had a pituitary gland issue, like Andre the Giant. What is that face for?
I don't really, can't find my words to describe what I'm thinking right now.
Basically putting together a Reddit thread, but that this guy was shunned from society for a pituitary gland issue and no one could understand what was happening. So they thought that he was some sort of creature and not a human and pushed him away from society back then the average height was a lot shorter than it is now, and that this guy was 7 feet tall in the early stages of the Sasquatch theory, and they put him out in the woods, and other societies weren't aware of him. And you see this dude walking by that's 7 feet tall, 7'2". You kind of get these big footprints, and you're not sure what's really going on. And then over time, that stretched into these kind of hoaxers or people that are trying to lead the conspiracy or the theory to what it is today.
So my theory is that I think that you shouldn't broadcast that theory.
I like it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I believe in my own theory, but I like to think there's a plausible scenario there, unless it's just some weird kid's tale that popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'm an empirical guy, so either I need to experience it or it needs to be done in an experiment for me to be like, okay, so there's some founding to that. And granted, some of those things can be like fabricated and whatnot, but I haven't seen any empirical evidence that there's been an existence of Bigfoot. I mean, if you empirically believe that the camera phone shots from your Nokia, your first Nokia phone, or is enough to make you believe in Sasquatch, then like good for you. But I'll wait. I'll be waiting.
I'll wait on it too. But that's our first installment right there of just kind of odd theories of things we've talked about, we haven't talked about. Kind of gets the mind going. We really have fun about it in our free time. And there's some theories that we'll eventually talk on that we really either disagreed on at one point or really were on the same track on. We look to do this kind of recurrently, so just go ahead and leave some feedback about what you thought about the episode, or maybe some theories you have thought of that we can look into, as abstract as they are. And we'll look into them and get back to them at a certain point. But thank you for listening. As always, share, follow, like us. And that'll do it.
Thanks, guys.